Okay, I want to talk about some of the essential design features that we have specifically now in a Hannigan trike. I should maybe say that Dave Hannigan is the owner of our company, is a very principled individual, and he tries to apply principles to every aspect of what he does in every part of his life. One of the things that he did almost 20 years ago now, when he first started to build trikes, was to really take a look at what others were doing, because we weren't the first, and to see what was working and what was not working. His goal was to come up with the essential principles that would make a trike work really well. And he did a very good job of doing that. Every Hannigan trike from that time forward has employed 6 essential principles, and that's what's written for you on the front page of the handout that I gave you there. The first one is independent suspension, and if you've been selling trikes, you've probably noticed that almost the first question that most prospective customers ask is, does it have independent suspension? And you say, yes, it has independent suspension. And they say, are you sure it has independent suspension? There was, maybe up until 10 years ago, there was a lot of debate as to which was better, a solid axle or independent suspension. I think that debate is over. Everybody has finally admitted that, yes, independent suspension provides such a higher quality of ride that nearly everybody has got to that. Although there's one big notable exception, and we'll mention that a little later on in the presentation. If you look at the trike, you can see that we've got not a solid axle, but half shafts that can flex. And basically, that makes a tremendous difference. When you hit a bump, instead of the whole trike being affected, as with a solid axle, here, just the one wheel can move independently, and it makes a much higher quality ride. When I first got into the trike industry, I was selling solid axle trikes, and they had a very harsh ride. And I knew they had a very harsh ride. And so I would make a joke out of it with people before they ever got started. I'd tell them, if you run over a dime, you can tell if it's heads or tails. And it's just about that bad. Independent suspension, of course, gives you a big advantage. And that ties right into the next point that we've got there, which is the wide track. A wide track on a trike actually gives your independent suspension more opportunity to work. If you have a very narrow trike, you may have independent suspension, but it's still going to be choppy. We use a wider track than pretty much anybody else in the industry, and that is deliberate because it causes a better ride and greater stability. The wide track is going to increase the stability, and it's going to let your suspension do its job better. The next thing that we've incorporated into every one of our trikes is an anti-sway bar or stabilizer bar, and that's what you've got right here. You can see it running across from one side to the other. If you come hard into a turn, you're going to find that stabilizer bar will take over and hold you flat through the turn. You'll feel just a little bit of movement in your suspension as you start to enter the turn, and then that's arrested, and you're going to have that nice flat turn. In some respects, the principles that we're using here are similar to the principles that are utilized in high-end sports cars. Okay? If you think about it, they use independent suspension. They use a wide track. You may have noticed that on modern sports cars, unlike some of the early sports cars, they have taken and pushed the wheels as far as possible to the outside corners. Makes sense. Same idea, what we've done here, all right? And that stabilizer bar is going to give you a tremendous advantage when you get into hard cornering. Now, when I start telling people these things, you know, it makes it so you can handle and ride through the curves faster than you can with other trikes. And frankly, most people will find that they can ride through the twisties. Once they get used to the trike, they can go through the twisties faster than they could on two wheels on that same motorcycle. I'm not saying that you'll outrun sport bikes, although I can tell you that another fella and I from the company did pass a 900 Triumph sport bike in Deals Gap one time. He wasn't the world's best rider, but still, it was kind of fun. These are all things that contribute to handling, and a lot of people say, well, I don't ride that hard, so it really isn't important to me. But what you want people to understand is that the capacity to ride that hard translates into a safety advantage. If a deer runs out in front of you, or somebody cuts you off, and you have to make that hard directional change, this trike is better able to do it than any of the other trikes that we compete against. So that's a pretty big deal. A low center of gravity. There are other trikes out there that share some of the 6 essential principles, but they don't share all of them. And you'll see some that are narrow and tall, and when you corner hard, you'll see them swaying, you know, back and forth in the turns like this. So a low center of gravity with low unsprung weight is a big deal. A rigid chassis. And when I talk about a rigid chassis, we're not only talking about the heavy gauge steel frame, but we're also talking about the amount of connecting points between the kit and the host motorcycle. Your technician over here can probably tell you that there's a lot of connection points between the kit and the bike. The trike that we most often are compared to when people are trying to decide which one they want to buy does not have near the connecting points we do. We had a fellow on one of their trikes come by for some assistance at our factory, and we were able to help him out. We ended up pulling his body. They had 7 connecting points between the kit and the bike. We have 18. So it makes for a much more rigid chassis, which contributes to a better handling trike, as well as greater safety.
And one that's going to last longer.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're putting less stress on all of those points. And interestingly enough, you know, a lot of the first Hannigan trikes that were put on the road nearly 20 years ago are still out there operating and doing fine. Hannigan products have always had a lot of longevity. As a point of interest, Dave, and I'll say a little more about the company later, but Dave started out by building fairings back before the manufacturers were putting fairings on the motorcycles. And that's how he got the business started. In fact, the official name of the company is still the Hannigan Fairing Company. But obviously, we haven't built fairings now for years, but it surprises me and delights me how many people are still riding motorcycles with those original Hannigan fairings, and they're still in good shape. And some of these guys have worn out, you know, 3 or 4 motorcycles under the same fairing. Love it and have continued to use it. So you get the very rigid chassis, and this is a big deal. We have an inline drive shaft. And what am I talking about here? What I'm talking about is the fact that we leave the drive shaft in its original position. We don't take and run it at a steep angle. And that makes a huge difference in terms of your longevity, and also minimizes the likelihood of vibration. The way we look at it, you know, these manufacturers of the motorcycles have some pretty smart engineers. If they put the drive shaft in that position, they probably put it in that position for a reason. And if we take and run it at an angle that was never intended to run at, you put a lot of stress on your U-joints and have a much higher failure rate. We virtually never see problems with our drivetrain. And some of our competitors have had huge problems, warranty issues and redos as a result of neglecting that principle of keeping the drive shaft in its original position. And if you're dealing with a belt drive motorcycle, such as a Harley Davidson or an Indian, we keep the stock belt in its original position.